They had a chief diversity officer, but they didn't have a chief risk officer. And finally got one appointed the end of January, which is probably kind of late. Part of it's management, the mismanagement and interests. I mean, you can go both sides, and part of it is a macroeconomic problem caused by our Federal Reserve. It's a combination here, but it's tragic. I still believe it didn't have to happen.
Hi, my name is Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
Welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop.
Yes.
It's the week of St. Patrick's Day, so there'll be a bit of a St. Patrick's Day theme at the end of the show.
As long as you're from Ireland, there's a welcome on the mat.
That's enough of that. So we watched the Oscars, so you don't have to. We're going to talk a little bit about the Oscars.
The Irish
today.
were robbed. The Irish were robbed.
And later we're going to talk to Laura Echevarria of the National Right to Life about the recent lawsuits challenging the Texas abortion ban.
And
what else we can expect, by the way, in a post-Roe America.
And the really extreme abortion legislation that's happening all over America at the moment that you won't read about in the mainstream media. And we talked to our friend Jim Thortan about the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. Jim actually has worked with the Silicon Valley Bank in his past and has a unique insights into the macro picture and the smaller picture of how the bank grew and how it changed.
And as I said, it is St. Patrick's Day, so it's St. Patrick's Day this week and coming up in a couple of days. And so we have a fabulous Irish recipe with little twist, slightly not the exact recipe that it should be, but yes, okay, that's you're not going to miss that. But first we watched the Oscars again, because we do these things, we sacrifice ourselves and
by
we
the way,
watch them, so you didn't have to.
Can I just say we also sacrificed ourselves for you guys to watch an awful lot of the Oscar movies.
Correct.
Oscar nominated movies.
Actually, and some of them, anyway, with mixed results.
Well, the mixed results, yes, Everything Everywhere All at Once. We think
I thought it was great.
Yeah, and it deservedly won most of the Oscars.
But there's very mixed opinion on Everything Everywhere All at Once. A lot of people, it didn't work for a lot of people, and I just thought it was very creative and kind of excitingly creative in a very dull Hollywood that seems to be doing the same thing over and over again.
It was creative, yeah. It pushed the gay thing a lot, of course, but this is a Hollywood movie, so it has to. At least it didn't push the transgender thing, I don't think.
No, it didn't. It didn't. Actually, I don't think it did.
No, who knows?
But you never know.
It's so common now. You almost brush over it.
So just a couple of things that struck us about the Oscars at the beginning when they were doing the red carpet was gone, so they had a champagne carpet, and on the champagne coloured carpet, Hugh Grant was interviewed by somebody called Ashley Graham, who's a TV host here, and he was just basically, I mean, you've probably heard this story, but super rude, give her these monosyllabic answers, and I just thought super disappointing. If you don't want to be interviewed, don't bother.
Well, I wasn't disappointed. I know that Hugh Grant is a confirmed
a plonker.
A vicious lefty.
Oh, right.
So, and the lefties are always, they're too good for you and me. We have made Hugh Grant. We, you, me, everyone out there has made Hugh Grant not a multimillionaire, not a deca-millionaire, but he has tens and tens and tens of millions, right? But he doesn't want to deal with you. He doesn't want to tell you.
Peasants.
He doesn't want to give you any information about how he's feeling. He doesn't want.
Yeah, and he's got that. It's like he's just cynical about everything. And has lost that freshness. And actually, just watching, by the way, the champagne-coloured carpet interviews, most people were actually really nice and were really chatty and were really enthusiastic about being there. And he did this jaded thing, which was very put on. He didn't win anything. He made a presentation during it with Andy McDowell, his old teammate on Four Weddings and a Funeral, very
Love Actually too,
and Love Actually. They were both in it.
No, Julia Roberts.
Julia Roberts in that.
Okay.
Anyway,
one of those.
Super disappointing. I just want to make a few points about the Oscars. There was another part that's quite funny. Look at the photograph coming up there right now.
Yeah.
This woman called Thames, right? I've never heard of her, but what a selfish woman, right? She wears this outfit which basically blocks the ability of the people behind her to see, and you can see a gentleman beside her there, to see him leaning over so that he can sort of see around the side of her very, very large headdress.
Can I just say that this shows the cowardice of Jimmy Kimmel, right? I mean, he was standing right beside her. Remember the part when he went to the crowd? He was standing right beside her. And any comedian anywhere on the planet would have made that comment.
Yeah, we made a joke about that. You think you want to deflate that headdress of yours there?
But basically, let's call it out. She has privilege. She is a person of color.
So you can't be telling her what to wear.
You can't be telling her what to wear. You can't be telling her to have manners, to have respect for the audience.
Okay, moving on. So The Whale won, Brendan Fraser won Best Actor for The Whale. We watched The Whale, so you don't have to, the other day, but actually I don't feel like that's actually the correct thing to say about The Whale. It was really amazing. It's an incredible performance, but it's
anti-Christian.
It's certainly... well, then there's one moment though that's actually Anyway, but
one moment in a
that's
the villain of the piece, or the villains of the piece, are a Christian church.
Yeah.
Now they're an end times Christian church, so they're slightly culty. But at the end of Christianity does not come out of it as well. So it is
Shocker.
Hollywood, and the gay people are all wonderful, and everyone.
Actually, talking of anti-Christian bias in Hollywood, I thought it was very interesting. I don't know if we talked about this film, but I just noticed it on Twitter the other day. Rainn Wilson, who is one of the stars of The Office, I wouldn't have expected anything great from him, but he has recently complained about the worldwide success of The Last of Us, and apparently in The Last of Us, we haven't watched it, but apparently in The Last of Us, there is a moment where a character starts reading from the Bible, and he said the minute the guy started reading the Bible, he thought, okay, here we go. This guy is going to turn out to be evil, and he did. And Rainn Wilson complained about that, which I thought was quite impressive.
It's what you always say with Law and Order. Once Law and Order, you meet all these people at the beginning who
did it? Oh my God, who did it?
Well, none of them did it. They're just passerby. But you see this one person that they casually meet who's reading a Bible, and you think,
now we know
there's going to be a twist, and he's going to be the killer. And it's like
he's the paedophile, he's whatever, but
he's
the bad guy for sure. So it ruins every story. One really nice part I thought about the Oscar ceremony, which generally, by the way, was very apolitical, but we'll get into that in a minute. But one of the winners was a movie which we have not seen, a short movie. The best short movie was called An Irish Goodbye. It's from Northern Ireland, starring a guy called James Martin, who's a young Down syndrome man. And it won, it won. And and by the way, apparently, I'm trusting the interwebs here. It's the first time a Down syndrome person has won an Oscar. But you can all get in touch with me and tell me I'm wrong about that. But what I thought was quite, I don't know if the right word is ironic about that, but what was quite extraordinary to me about that was particularly that this production is from Northern Ireland, which at the moment, Phil, I'm sorry to tell you, is still part of the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom has the most extraordinary law, which a lot of people, which again, a bit like we're going to hear again in our interview with Laura from the National Right to Life. The UK has an extraordinary law that I think needs a lot of promotion, and we should all know about it. Everyone should know about it, because the UK should be so proud.
Promotion might not be the word.
Well, it needs to be
Everyone needs to know about it.
It should be, broadcast. It needs to be broadcast loudly. So they have a law in the UK that you can abort a baby with Down syndrome up to 9 months. For, absolutely 100% up to 9 months, you can abort a baby from this place where this young man, James Martin, with Down syndrome, has just won an Academy Award. So everyone should know about that. I would like it to be, I would like the story to be promoted, because people need to know it. It's an unreported story. It's a very unreported story. By the way, just to add, just to let you know, again, the extraordinary laws in the United Kingdom, they also have abortion up to 9 months for anyone with hair lip. So there you go. Isn't that interesting? And I just wonder how many people in the United Kingdom know that that's the law.
Yeah, well, they sang Happy Birthday to him.
They sang Happy Birthday to him, which was great. And I just thought it was a very nice moment.
Yeah,
Jimmy Fallon, but there was some politics, right? We were watching it and thinking, this is great.
Well, I tweeted, an hour has gone by, no politics. 2 hours went by. And actually, it was a lovely, pleasant, nice Oscars. And then towards the end, Jimmy Kimmel, with a joke about Tucker Carlson. And you know what? Well, can I just say something? 2 or 3 million people watch Tucker Carlson, maybe less. Mm-hmm. Maybe, I think actually it's only about 1 million. How many of those were watching Tucker Carlson's January 6th tapes? How many of the people who watch Jimmy Kimmel show know about we're talking about a small, minute part of the audience. But Jimmy Fallon wanted to make this joke. They just can't help themselves, and he didn't make it at the beginning. I think the monologue was politically joke free. In fact, they had a little dig at Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, but it wasn't really. It was more of a dig at Seth Rogen and Steven Spielberg. But it was a fun joke.
So what Jimmy Kimmel then did, by the way, was, so when they came to the editing category, the prize for the editing category, he basically said editors can turn 44,000 hours of violent insurrection footage into a respectful sightseeing tour of the capital. So, so this was his big joke, that's the magic of the editor, that this is what they did. Very lame, very pathetic, but actually I think sort of shows that what Tucker Carlson has revealed in the footage is pretty extraordinary and very shocking. Elon Musk has just got involved with the QAnon shaman, this guy, you'll see a picture of him there, who everyone remembers very clearly from the January 6th day. And, the idea, and basically what Tucker Carlson showed was that this guy was walking around like a tourist. Mm-hmm. And by the way, further footage showed him actually on a megaphone shouting to the crowd and saying, President Trump has asked us all to leave peacefully. I would ask everyone to leave peacefully. I do think it's a little bit relevant, by the way. Sorry, yes. Jimmy Kimmel. Sorry to
the guy spending
to ruin your story.
5 years in prison for that.
Yeah, and I think that, by the way, that's at least context, which yes. I don't believe. And if you're going to talk about editing, the January 6th committee did a fair bit of they started this editing craze, by the way. Yes. If you're going to go there, Jimmy Kimmel. So pathetic. That was a real shame. Yes. However, what was very nice was that Michelle Yeoh, who won Best Actress, and basically the film, obviously Everything Everywhere All at Once, won everything. Yes. So she was up and down off the stage like a yo-yo. But at one stage she went up and she basically roasted Don Lemon, because you'll remember that Don Lemon had made a joke, not a joke actually, had basically made a quip about Nikki Haley
being past her prime because she's such an age. Michelle Yeoh is 60, and she says, here's follow your dreams, blah blah blah, and don't let anybody
tell you you're ever past your prime, ladies.
I have to say how the mighty have fallen. He went from the Trump warrior, primetime CNN, to being the butt of a joke at the Oscars by another liberal actor.
Very nice.
It's
very nice.
It's not good now. Not good for his career trajectory, and we are very upset about that.
So we're going to go over now, by the way, to our interview that we just did earlier with Laura from the National Right to Life. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce her name because I didn't do well the first time. But
she's got information you really want to hear, you really want to know.
We need to be engaged with,
and you won't find it in the mainstream media. So please listen to this interview. Yeah, so we're joined by Laura Echevarria. Am I pronouncing it correctly, Laura?
Echevarria.
Echevarria, who's the Director of Communications at the National Right to Life organisation. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I suppose this interview was prompted by the New York Times articles of recent days about women in Texas suing the state for their inability to get an abortion in Texas. This is just one of a million articles that have appeared since the Roe versus Wade was overturned, and they always focus on these extreme cases these difficult cases and the extreme effects of the laws that have come in to replace Roe v. Wade. But there's very little, no publicity, in fact, in the mainstream media for the extreme laws that have come in response to Roe versus Wade. So that's why we wanted to talk to you. We wanted to look at that side of the equation as well. But first of all, tell us about the Texas cases. Tell us about these extreme cases. Is there any validity to them? And what does National Right to Life say about that?
Well, in each one of the cases, one of the things that we've noticed, in particular, there was one woman who talked about the dangers to her child, the dangers to her health and life, but there was no specific diagnosis mentioned. Another one was a rupture of membranes, that can happen. And in that case, doctors do take a wait and see kind of attitude. And she was far enough along in her pregnancy. I think she was 19 and a half weeks. She was very close to when the child could survive outside the womb. And so it's not unusual for doctors to take that kind of wait and see approach. I know personally, through all three of my pregnancies, where I had children who survived and lived, I had one miscarriage. Each one of those situations, I had preeclampsia and pregnancy-induced hypertension. And those are considered life-threatening situations in this day and age. And in each one of those instances, my doctor took a wait-and-see approach. I ended up being induced and induced early because my blood pressure had become so dangerously high. But it was a wait-and-see approach. And that's usually, doctors do have the tendency to err on the side of caution. One of the other women talked about her child having trisomy 18, which is a condition that very often the child does not survive, not shortly, will shortly pass away after birth. But in those situations, when a child has a disability, you don't prescribe death for that child. And that's what would have happened in an abortion. So having an abortion and killing the child before birth to stave off the child possibly dying after birth doesn't make any sense. And is certainly in those instances, it would be extremely rare for the mother to actually undergo anything life-threatening. And I think the other condition was twins with twin-to-twin transfer syndrome, where one twin was growing faster than the other one, and the other one had a medical condition that the mother had mentioned was incompatible with survival outside the womb. And again, in that instance, she actually increased her risk to the life of the other twin by having an abortion, because she had to surgically undergo an abortion to kill the first twin, and that increases the risk for the second. Again, that did make an awful lot of sense, and many times doctors do have a wait and see approach, which is practically, from a practical standpoint, very often the wisest approach.
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, the New York Times, of course, lose nothing in their dramatising of all this, and they talked about catastrophic harms to women since the Dobbs decision, since Roe was overturned. What's your response to that phrase that there's been catastrophic harm to women all over the country?
Well, what also impressed me there was, that so many details, as usual, so many details are left out. You get the catastrophic harm, but you don't get the details, the context. And the counter arguments and the counterpoints. So really, we can't believe a word they say. But tell me, what's your reaction to the catastrophic harm issue?
Well, I think you really just pointed out one of the biggest issues is that we don't hear a lot of the counter arguments. Like I said, many doctors take a wait and see approach anyway. That's standard. But also, we're not hearing the full story. For some of these women, like I said, the abortion actually could have placed them in greater harm. And also the thing that's not pointed out in these stories is very often you hear that it's the life of the mother or the health of the mother, or that the mother's life is endangered. When a woman has a later abortion, it often, depending upon the technique that's being used, it can take 2 to 3 days for that kind of abortion procedure to be implemented. And if you're talking about a true life of the mother situation, a doctor can have a woman in the emergency room and have a cesarean performed in under an hour. So there's a huge difference in what would be considered a true life of the mother situation, and where something might be life-threatening or it could be concerning in terms of the complications, but not necessarily immediate harm. And that's something that is often you don't hear about in these stories, that you don't realize the emergency that maybe not the emergency that maybe they may be dealing with.
Yeah, and I think what you're pointing to there actually is the interesting thing is that there's never a need for an abortion, and that what happens in situations where the mother's life is in some kind of danger, the child is delivered, and every effort is made for the child to survive. That what they don't do is intentionally kill the child. And it's funny, we literally watched over the weekend, right, film? Which one was it?
Oh, The Good Doctor. But look, it's almost.
It's kind of. We watched The Good Doctor. This is the narrative that has been pushed forward all the time. Is that this abortion has to happen, and has to happen right now, or there'll be some kind of catastrophic. As they say, catastrophic thing. And in fact, and maybe you'd speak to that a little bit more. That is actually never the case.
But also, I would add. I mean, it's not only. I mean, you said to me, what was the show? I mean, it's every show.
Yeah.
It's every show. This message is pumped in every Hollywood show, in every network show now. So tell us your reaction to that, but tell us your reaction to that thesis that's pumped in every show.
Well, there's actually two things that I can say to address that. The first one is, like I said, in my particular instance, what happened with my pregnancies is actually very normal. If you with things like preeclampsia, placenta previa, and things like that, time very often either solves the issue, like with placenta previa, a cesarean can be performed, or in the case of pregnancy-induced hypertension or preeclampsia, those conditions very often show up later in the pregnancy when the child can be safely delivered. It's very unusual for a woman to undergo eclampsia or preeclampsia really very early in the pregnancy. The stresses that her body may be undergoing that may cause those medical conditions won't show up until later. And at that point in time, doctors can do what's commonly referred to as a separation event, where they deliver the baby early and mother and child can be treated as two separate patients at that point in time. So that's the common treatment for these medical conditions. And that's something that's not given, or not, that information is not presented to the public. The other thing that I'd like to point out to your listeners is that Hollywood often puts these storylines in TV shows because Planned Parenthood actually has someone on their staff who does go around to Hollywood directors and Hollywood writers, and this is one of their goals, is to put abortion in television shows and in movies to the degree that they can, that try to, quote, normalize abortion. And that is something that they do, and they have a staff person whose job is solely
Very well.
We've talked about her before. I can't remember her name now, but yeah, she has a full-time job, and that's all she does. Speaks to screenwriters, speaks to movie people, getting this storyline out.
And she's pushing an open door, and I suppose, why do fair enough, a story is a story and it's fiction, etc., and we all know they exaggerate, but the reality is the New York Times, The Good Doctor, 911, all these shows that as you say normalize abortion, and they're quite open, that's what they want to do. But why don't they talk about the extreme measures, and this is why don't the media talk about the extreme measures that have come in since Roe versus Wade in perhaps 7 or 8 or 9, I want you to tell us, and states across the union where you can have an abortion up to 9 months for any reason.
For example, Colorado is a good example. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, New York is a really good example. New York, right after Dobbs came down, they immediately started working on trying to pass the most expansive piece of legislation out there. New York actually has something that goes beyond Roe versus Wade in terms of just what they are doing in that state. And I think we're going to see that divide in states where we have very liberal states that are going to really push the envelope on what's allowed, and much more conservative states with conservative legislatures that are going to work to protect mothers and their unborn babies. And I think you also nailed it on the head right there, that as far as stories are concerned and what people are seeing on television and even in the news media, these groups are pushing on an open door. This is something that Planned Parenthood and NARAL and National Abortion Federation, they have an audience with the news media that's more than willing to tell these stories. And as both of you are aware of, storytelling really resonates in our society today, and it's something that people can relate to. And when we tell stories about the human condition, it draws people in. And so the more sensational, whether you get the facts right or not, the more sensational, the more likely people are going to be paying attention. And as we are all aware, the major news media outlets, they're often looking at ratings and who's watching and what audience is paying attention. And those are things that they are worried about, and they are trying to reach audiences using whatever storytelling is available. And if it means, concealing some information or not being completely forthright, it makes for a better story. My husband has this cute little catchphrase that he says, "Why should the truth get in the way of my story?"
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's very often what the media, that's very often what the media adheres to. Why does the truth need to get in the way of the story?
Yeah, and the truth is, I mean, and I want you to speak to that a little bit, because I think it really is an untold story, an unreported story, that you can have an abortion in the United States of America up to 9 months in a lot of places, and in fact in a lot of places which have the highest populations. So, you know, give us a rundown of where these extreme abortion laws are part of the Constitution, are part of the legal system.
Well, one of the things we're looking at, like I said, New York, Colorado's another, California. Oh my goodness. Right now, one of the things that we're dealing with, as I'm sure you're aware of, about 54% of all abortions are done using mifepristone, which is the abortion drug. And we're dealing right now with major pharmacies like Walgreens and CVS and Rite Aid considering selling those pills in their pharmacies in states like California and New York, Colorado, places like that, where it's open season on the unborn child. And Governor Newsom in California, as you are aware, because I believe that's where you live,
Yes.
Governor Newsom has said that he's already upset at Walgreens, because Walgreens said that they would not necessarily mail the pills out, or they wouldn't necessarily sell them in states where it's not allowed. And Walgreens has to look not only at their bottom line, which of course they're probably considering selling abortion pills to be, a good business practice. And we're trying to tell them, no, dealing in death is not a good business practice, but they also have to pay attention to what the law allows. And Newsom is trying to push that envelope. We've seen the governor of California really push on trying to make mifepristone available on college campuses. We've seen Planned Parenthood move in and offer to staff clinics near and on college campuses so that they can push abortion on college students. We've seen this over and over and over again. And so in the states where there has been this push to really open the door and allow abortion for any reason, under any circumstances, regardless, we are now seeing that there's a push to have the state pay for these abortions, or to provide supplements to these abortion costs. We've seen companies as well as states offer housing. They've offered transportation to people seeking abortion. So it goes beyond. It's not just the state allows the abortion, but they are also now facilitating the abortions. It goes far beyond just letting.
I want to talk about how this is not just, though, confined to liberal states. Since Roe v. Wade was overturned, we have states like Montana and
Kentucky
and
Kansas.
Kansas.
Where
they're losing,
where the pro-life message was lost. I mean, so there was 6 ballot initiatives since Roe was overturned.
Yes.
3 of them were pro-life and 3 of them were pro-abortion. But in the in all 6 were won by the pro-abortion side. But in the pro-life side states, in the conservative states, tell us what happened there. So that's Kentucky, Kansas, and Montana. Disappointing, obviously, and a bit worrisome for the future.
They were ballot initiatives, like you mentioned. And the problem with these, the pro-life groups and the pro-life coalitions in these states were outspent, hands down, hand over fist, by millions and millions. The amount of money that was thrown at these ballot initiatives, and liberal outside groups came in. And again, this goes back to, I believe it goes back to Jonathan Edwards, actually, where a truth can be putting its pants on while a lie has already made its way around the world. And that's what happened in these states, where there was so much money pouring in, and they were able to put out messaging that was not truthful. And even though they lied repeatedly, no one was catching them on this or willing to talk about it. The news media let them get away with it. No one questioned these narratives that were being given. No one questioned the fact that these were lies that were being presented to the public. And because the pro-life coalitions were outspent, they could not meet the need with the television advertising and the radio advertising, to counter these arguments. And as soon as they would get something out to counter the other side would come back with another lie, and they just kept getting hammered and hammered and hammered and so outspent. And that's part of the problem. The news media lets the pro-abortion groups get away with these narratives. They let them get away with saying these things, and there's no counter argument. They are even right now, the pro-abortion groups, several of them are arguing that the news media should no longer allow pro-life groups to be represented in stories, because to them they're saying, well, this isn't truth, this isn't science, so therefore you should not give equal time to the other side. So that's the next thing we're seeing that pro-abortion groups like Planned Parenthood are now pushing this narrative that you should not give equal time to the pro-life side on this issue. And so I would not be surprised. We're already seeing it to some degree, but this isn't unusual for us to see it with really, really liberal outlets. They really do prefer going to the other side. We really very rarely get phone calls from them. But we used to, and I haven't seen any phone calls from those really liberal media outlets probably in the past year. And as we move forward, I know that this is a trend that once we see it in one area, we may start seeing it in other more mainstream legacy media outlets as well, where we don't get as much time as far as our viewpoint is concerned.
So this is, you're painting a pretty bleak picture going forward, particularly in the 2024 cycle, where I think it's very clear that the pro-life side is very vastly, outspent by the pro-abortion side.
We are.
What is the National Right to Life doing to try to counter these arguments going forward in the 2024 cycle?
Well, one of the things that we do really, really, really well, we may not have the money and we may get outspent, but what we do have is we have more Americans on our side and we have the truth on our side. And so there are media outlets that do pay very close attention to what we do and what we say. And then on top of that, we have a grassroots network that cannot be outwalked, outmarched, outspoken more than they are, because these are the soul. This is the soul of the pro-life movement. Those individuals, boots on the ground individuals, who are out there every day trying to do their best to save mothers and their unborn babies. And what we may not be able to do money-wise, we can outspend, quote unquote, with the number of people we have on our side on this issue. And that is something that we do very well. As you are aware, National Right to Life, we have affiliates in all the states, and then we have over 3,000 chapters nationally. So we match almost chapter per pregnancy center. So there are over 2,500 pregnancy centers in the U.S. And so between the pregnancy centers who are helping women and their unborn babies through financial assistance and through just practical helps, parenting classes, diapers, baby formula, and helping young women make the connections they need to make in the local community to help them give birth and help them succeed. We also have those local chapters who are working hand in hand with the pregnancy centers and with people on the ground and in the legislatures to affect change. And so that's something that we do very, very well. The downside with the ballot initiatives was that people were going directly to the voters, and the other side had the pro-life coalitions outspent. And that was what happened. They were outspent, and the messaging was skewed that the other side presented and full of mistruths. And that was difficult for them to counter.
And I think what we can expect in 2024 cycle is particularly those 9 states where abortion has pretty much been banned. There will be a massive concentration of effort from the pro-abortion side. Is that correct?
Yes, and we are already seeing that. We're seeing rumblings of that, and those states have been mentioned. Also, we're seeing countersuits. Texas is a perfect example of movement being done on the state level in those legislatures by pro-abortion groups to try to change the law or to create loopholes in the laws. And we're going to continue to see this. One of the things that when we walk into this, and one of the things that was told to me by our executive director at the time, was that once Roe fell, we would be in a state-by-state battle. And what has happened with the Dobbs decision is that we've actually increased our workload in a good way, but we've increased our workload. And so we're not done. We're moving forward. And this is something that I do want to encourage people to get involved in the pro-life movement. We need help now more than ever. And if people are not actively involved in their state pro-life groups, to please do so. This is a state-by-state battle now.
How can people get in touch with you guys then? Where should they go?
Well, for more information, they can go to our website, which is www.nrlc.org. And if someone has specific questions, they can feel free to reach out to me, and I will certainly get them in touch with the proper person. The best email address for me is mediarelations@nrlc.org.
Great. Well, it's been great talking to you.
Thank you
Laura.
so much. And I think we'll be talking to you again
too. Thank you.
going forward.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
As I say, that is information you want to hear. Go to the National Right to Life Committee website. You'll find. I mean, it's shocking what's in various states and various cities, and in a city near you. So, on a different note, we're going to now go to Jim Thortan. He's a retired venture capitalist. This is an interview we did just before we came on air. And as I say, it's a moment in time.
It's kind of an unfortunate thing, actually, but we still thought it was important to talk to Jim, even though this is obviously a breaking news story and things could change between the time of us editing this and having it go out. But I think it's still worthwhile hearing from Jim about the Silicon Valley Bank.
His experience with Silicon Valley Bank and how we got from there to here. Let's go to that interview. Okay, well, as we said, we're joined now by Jim Thortan, who is a retired venture capitalist and banker and at a CPA, certified CPA. But more significantly, he did business with the Silicon Valley Bank, SVB Bank, for years and has watched it grow and not grow and the rise and fall of the Silicon Valley Bank. I think there's no one better to explain what happened. And I think, Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Philemon, man.
Listen, I think we should tell people we're recording this. We record the podcast on a Monday. We're recording it Monday, around 11 a.m. Pacific time. The situation is fluid. The situation could change. It's going to be hard to predict. So we're not going to ask you to predict the future, but if you want to feel comfortable predicting the future, but who knows in Biden's America what the future is. But we want to talk about the past. We want to say to people, to explain to people how did we get to here and where we're going.
Well, I have to start at a macroeconomic level. And I think it started with a really incredibly historic rapid rise in the Fed funds interest rate. That's the rate that banks have to pay to borrow from other banks. It affects your credit cards, home loans, etc. And it went from, in February 2022, from 0.25% all the way up to today 4.5%, 4.75%, something like that.
Say that again. How much, sorry?
Almost 4.5% it went up within a 10-month period. That's eight interest rate increases by the Federal Reserve Bank.
From what? What was the original amount?
It was 0.25.
Wow,
a quarter
percent.
Yeah.
Okay, so nothing then, basically.
So breathtaking in its acceleration. And this particular bank, which makes commercial loans, business loans, and of course, with the macro, backing up a second, with the macroeconomic backdrop, we sustained $6 trillion in budget deficit. We issued $6 trillion in additional debt for the United States. It's now, as you know, $31 trillion. So the Treasury is issuing a lot of Treasury securities, Treasury bonds. And Silicon Valley Bank, given that it found itself flush with cash, about $170 billion in deposits at the beginning of 2022.
Treat me like an idiot on this because we are. Why was it flush with cash?
Well, we had this a lot of IPOs, and another thing they call SPAC, Special Purpose Acquisition Corps. We had a lot of money raised in the crypto market. There was just a lot of money from venture capitalists that were pouring into a number of companies still at that point in 2022. They had a lot of deposits. They only have 37,000 customers versus, say, a Bank of America, which has 64 million customers and can spread the deposit risk amongst a lot of small customers. And they had 37,000 customers centered mostly in Democrat strongholds like Austin, San Francisco, New York. And a lot of them are highly educated. The venture capitalists, obviously very wealthy. And then they also had a small portfolio of vineyards and wineries, about $4 billion. So overall, they had about $75 billion in loans, Silicon Valley Bank. Keep in mind that Silicon Valley Bank and this other bank we're talking about too, I think it's called Republic Bank, constitute maybe at most $500 billion in assets. That's about 2% of all assets in the United States, of all commercial banks. We have almost $22 trillion in our commercial banks in the US. And these two banks can make up just about under 500 billion. So I don't call that systemic risk, but I'll get to that in a moment. So basically we had all these rapid interest rate increases. And Silicon Valley Bank made the mistake of buying treasury notes and bonds that were yielding 2% in that range.
Which can I just say, we're always taught that that's the right thing to do for safety and security, and that's what you want from your bank. You don't want them buying Bitcoin or investing in some latest idea. You want to know your money's there. Like as they say, as safe as the post office, boring. Don't give me flashy ideas. So they were doing the right thing, surely.
At the time, it looked like it. But then we've had this rush by the Federal Reserve. Inflation, suddenly the supply chain was causing inflation, and they started ratcheting up interest rates. And a basic economic theory, and it works without flaw, is that when interest rates go up, the principal value of, say it goes from 2 to 4%, the principal value of your bond or your note goes down in value, because investors today are demanding 4.5% yield, not the 2% that you acquired back a year ago. So they took about $120 billion and invested a lot of that in mortgage bonds, treasury bonds. Generally, it was about 6 to 10 years, in that range. And yeah, they put some into lending. They went from 50 to 75 billion in loans. And those loans are generally secured by accounts receivable and inventory and furniture, medical equipment. And so they decided to take this excess depositor cash and put it into 2%, 125 billion in treasury note securities and mortgage bonds. So, but by the time the interest rates ratcheted up by January of this year, 2023, they were underwater on a good portion of that portfolio.
When you say they were underwater, why? What does that mean, and why?
They acquired treasury notes and bonds at a 2% yield, roughly about over the last year. An investor today would demand, because of the inflation, because Fed funds has now been brought up much higher by the Federal Reserve to a 4.5% range. An investor today, to take those notes and bonds off their hands, off Silicon Valley's hands, would demand that it be discounted, the 2% bonds that they have.
So let's say you buy a bond for $1 million and you're getting 2% of it, and you go to sell that bond. Everyone will go, I'm not buying that at a 2% yield. I want 4%. Okay, so I'll buy your $1 million bond for 900,000 or 800,000. Is that the case?
Absolutely correct.
So it's not worth what they paid for it. So it's a loss for the bank.
Exactly, and they had that in a good portion, or some portion. We'll know more soon, in that $125 billion portfolio they had. Now, the news last week is they went out and sold 21 billion of those bonds to a third party, and they sustained a $1.8 billion loss.
So that's a 10% loss. So actually, I was quite close to the figure.
You were.
Yeah.
When that word got out, and they announced it without, probably in my opinion, as a former VP of finance, not simultaneously announcing a successful money raise at the same time to plug that, it raised a lot of alarm bells. A lot of people started saying, a lot of investors saying, if they lost almost $2 billion by selling $21 billion of bonds, what would happen if they sold, what's the whole portfolio now worth? The whole entire 125. And keep in mind, this is a bank with its net worth, that's assets minus liabilities. Its entire net worth was $16 billion.
Okay, so let me just do some
Arbitrary math here.
arbitrary. So if they lost 10% on the 20 billion, then and we think they've got 125 billion in these loans, so they would lose. This is not correct, but they could lose up to 12 billion, maybe more, if they had to sell tomorrow. And their net worth is only 16 billion, so they're going to lose. They're losing the value of themselves. That's what they face. That's what they faced. So go ahead. So people going, oh.
Exactly right, and that basically would violate a lot of capital regulations that banks need to maintain. Then I'll give you just a comparison. Bank of America has 260 billion in net worth compared to what Silicon Valley Bank had. So there's a degradation in the capital base, or potentially more. And I think a lot of people latched onto that and said, it's kind of the cockroach theory. When you see one, there's many. And so a panic ensued. Suddenly, social media took over, particularly with a lot of wealthy backers and VCs in Silicon Valley. And the tragedy of this whole thing is that many of these VCs had great relationships and prospered and worked well and collaborated with Silicon Valley Bank over the last 40 years. They contributed to making them wealthy. They funded a lot of their companies, but it didn't seem to matter. And suddenly, I guess this new generation of investors basically threw them under the bus. Social media took over, and the panic ensued. And now we have a situation, unfortunately, where these 37,000 companies and the people surrounding it in Silicon Valley, New York, Austin, they're a favored constituency. They're donors to the Democratic Party. I think at this point, as we could probably tell from this morning, Biden is deciding to bail them out because they're suddenly they become so important. And my goodness, the systemic risk, when really, as I pointed out before, they're a minute fraction of the assets of all commercial banks in the United States.
I think they're a systemic risk to the Democratic donor base.
Exactly. Well, and Gavin Newsom, notice the first move was by the California regulators. I mean, it was just they had other options, Phil and Ann. They could have gone to the Fed themselves and said, listen, we want to go to your discount window. And the Fed has a discount window specifically for banks that are having liquidity issues. They could have gone there and said, hey, we have $75 billion of loans on our books. Why don't we sell some of them to you, even at a discount there? So they could have raised additional cash. Keep in mind that the run on the bank last week was about $42 billion of people demanding their money out. So they had to come up with $42 billion last week. They had total deposits in the bank of $160, $170 billion. So think of it as a quarter of the deposits they held there were suddenly being demanded to be taken out and transferred. So they could have sold off some loans, gone to the discount window at the Federal Reserve, but the regulators somehow would not have it. And so they came in, closed them up, and now declared systemic risk. And now suddenly, they're trying to tell us that the taxpayer's not bailing them out, but my goodness, all the rest of the banks now have to pay a special fee to the FDIC and the Federal Reserve to make up for these deficits.
And we know who's funding that. We're everyone else is funding that. It's a tax. It's an actual tax on every American.
Exactly, and Wells Fargo's customers are gonna also feel, as well as Bank of America.
Can I ask a question? I mean, obviously, one of the things that's come out over the last few days when they've been talking about this is that anyone with a deposit of more than $250,000 in cash, that's guaranteed or that's insured by the FDIC.
Yeah.
But beyond that, then the rest of the money is not insured. How many, I mean, for most people listening to that, it's like, well, yeah, great, whatever, How many people have how many accounts are there of that kind of size where people have that kind of money on deposit? That's the first part of my question. Second part of my question is, why would anyone have that kind of cash in an account?
A lot of people, if they had that amount, they'd have it at a brokerage firm and other investments, probably. And so it's really just a wealthy group. And notice that Republic Bank, who also serves the wealthy, is also having the same issue. It's a very narrow base of people. Yeah, I agree with you. This is not for the working guy, this bailout. It's really for the wealthy elite, sophisticated. And like I said, these well-educated people, they've got master's degrees, they're engineers, they're co-founders. Some of them are on their second or third company. They're already wealthy, or else the VCs wouldn't be thinking, they're about to have liquidity events sometime in the future. So
there was two things that really triggered me there, to use a phrase popular with the young people nowadays. You said 37,000. It has 37,000 customers.
Accounts, yeah, 37,000 customers, right? Customers.
You said that the Silicon Valley Bank has 37,000 customers accounts. That reminds me almost of. Am I correct now? But it also reminds me of the kind of the fiscal landscape in California, the fiscal landscape in New York. There are a small number of really rich people who are keeping the whole show going because of the tax system in America. And, rich people are very mobile. Rich people know how to move things and move themselves. And if they all decide to go, and they all know each other, and there's a small group of them, so it doesn't need a bank run. It needs them all to saunter over to their computer and move the money. Am I correct? Is it, was SVB particularly vulnerable?
I think it was, and I think the alarm bell went out when there were $42 billion of demand to move the money. And keep in mind, I mean, a lot of these companies have just, there's a certain portion of those 37,000 that have IPO, initial public offering proceeds. They needed to put somewhere. They put it in the bank. There's some that just raise a series of private rounds. They have money. Software companies typically are big cash flow generators, so they need to put it somewhere. But the other thing driving this is that because the IPO market has dried up and there haven't been many buyouts or mergers in the last 10 to 12 months, these 37,000 companies were using and burning their cash pretty significantly. So they were making calls on the cash in their accounts pretty significantly, and that was probably part of the 42 billion. And this will all come out. So there was a fear issue, there was a cash burn issue, there was a perceived liquidity issue at the bank, and so those things, along with social media, hysteria, just drove this thing, and it happened within a 48-hour period.
But actually, what you're saying, it didn't happen within a 48-hour period. The run happened, but the drain on cash has been a 10-month gradual drain because people are not getting the easy money they used to, and I suppose the tech boom has dried up. The pandemic-induced tech boom has dried up. So people are having to fund their businesses out of cash flow, out of the money that's coming in and the money that's in their bank, as opposed to, and they're burning through their savings, as many Americans are doing on a smaller scale.
Very good point. They weren't raising new money, particularly at the crazy prices that they were asking for 10 months ago. You notice some of them there's been a lot of staff cutting. There are reasons for that because advertising dollars for a lot of media companies have softened. So all this is kind of converging. And that was really part of the story here. And it's going to be really interesting. But they have enormous political clout. And I think that was used within the last 48 hours, convinced that systemic risk was all over the place.
Yeah, a systemic. I mean, it reminds me. I'm not. I think Hemingway is one of the most overrated writers on the planet. But he did say one thing about going bankrupt. How did you go bankrupt? Very slowly and then very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think, and I think this is a classic. Very slowly, a slow drain, and it wasn't like they weren't panicking. They didn't. It wasn't nothing personal towards SVP. They just needed money to run their companies.
And there's one more element to this. If interest rates have gone up to 4.5% Fed funds rate, other competing institutions are offering CDs and other instruments of a higher yield. So why should I keep my money in a non-interest bearing account at Silicon Valley Bank if other banks are offering more competitive rates, particularly in this environment, because the need for cash drives rates up. So that may have been part of it as well.
You were a former venture capitalist. Your career, you've worked with SVB. I think you talked about partner. By the way, the word partner with a bank, it's been a word that I've never liked. We used to have that during the Celtic Tiger in Ireland. They're doing this in partnership with their bank. Building a 100 million development in partnership. It's like saying we're in partnership with Wells Fargo on our house. It's not a great partnership. And one I can't call out Wells Fargo and ask them to do something. They can very quickly call me out tomorrow, and so it's not really a partnership. So you've been a partner of SVP, let's say for SVB for many years, or have you? Tell us about your relationship with them, and tell us what you noticed over the years. Was this something that you saw coming, or was there a change?
I have to say, I knew them most in a 10-year period between 1997 and 2007. They were always very judicious. They lent to companies in that emerging area of 1 to 10 million in sales, the embryonic stage. They did a very good job in securing the collateral, and at the same time providing financing for companies that needed to fill a gap, needed to get through the next 6 months to the next funding round, needed a bridge to get to their IPO or sale. They did a very, very good job in those days. What's happened today, I don't know. I mean, I hear that, diversity, equity, inclusion seems to come to the forefront. I was surprised to hear that they have an office in London and Hong Kong. Very often, companies geographically drift. They drift from some of the things that made them great performers. That may have happened. But keep in mind that every bank is supposed to have a risk officer, chief risk officer, CRO.
I wondered, were you going to mention their risk officer? Yeah, I think we've been reading a lot about their risk officer of late.
Tell us.
Yeah, there was one. They didn't have one for 8 months during 2022. They had a chief diversity officer, but they didn't have a chief risk officer. So, and finally got one appointed at the end of January, which is probably kind of late. And so part of it's management, the mismanagement and interests. I mean, you can go both sides, and part of it is a macroeconomic problem caused by our Federal Reserve. It's a combination here, but it's tragic. I still believe it didn't have to happen very much.
Yeah, we read, there was a lot of dramatic headlines, I don't know if they were true or not, saying that the risk management person had devoted a month to, I think, Pride Month, and I think it devoted 9 months to some kind of diversity training or diversity focus. And I don't know how true that is. I mean, by the way, just going back there to the fact that they didn't, for a period of time, didn't have a risk management person, is that even legal for a bank?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are probably some regulations that say you must have a risk management system. But I don't know if it's that specific about you have to have a particular officer with oversight and this level of experience. And I mean, that we may come to that. I think you're going to see suddenly the call will go out in Congress to do a number of things. One, make sure that banks have a chief risk officer there all the time that signs off on government documents. Two, that there's no tying arrangements to one bank. So if someone were to take a loan out again, that they need to keep their relationships not in one bank, but in 3 or 4 banks. And then they'll probably want earlier disclosure about what's in your investment portfolio, what kind of treasury securities you have. Are they marked down adequately to what the realistic level? So suddenly that's all going to suddenly be thrown into the mix here.
Yeah, I mean, that was one aspect of the Silicon Valley Bank that we didn't talk about, was that people borrowed money went into partnership, with the bank, and borrowed money from them, and they were forced to maintain banking. Part of the loan was that you would continue banking with Silicon Valley Bank, and that made it difficult for them to withdraw their money from Silicon Valley Bank, because that would have meant they'd immediately have to repay the loan. Is that correct?
That is correct. And from being a former banker, I can understand why Silicon Valley Bank did it, because these are such small companies. You need to watch the cash coming through and collateralize it in case there's a problem. So you want to keep it in one spot. That I understand when they're young in that 1 to 10 million sales range. But as they grow and get bigger and sales and they're profitable, they really need to diversify with a number of banks. And I think you're going to see the call go out for that, probably next week.
Yeah. I mean, this reminds me of, that phrase, that cliche that generals are very good at fighting the last war.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of banking regulations after the financial crisis. And it was all about, don't let banks invest in dodgy investment vehicles like these mortgages that were collateralized and repackaged, and they were all junk at the end of the day. There was a lot of junk in the middle of them. So the regulation was you have to basically, I mean, maybe I'm misquoting the regulation, but the idea of the regulation was you have to have so much of your money in government bonds because it's the United States government and they're as safe as houses. And so even if they had a chief risk officer, even if they had someone from the financial regulator sitting over their computer, he would be cheering them on, or he or she or they, because it's diversity. He or she or they would be cheering them on because they had bought safe government bonds. But that's in the end what did them in.
Right, and all they had to really do was where there's less volatility is buy 1-year bonds, 6-month, keep it very short. That's been very stable, but they went out long, and so they didn't take credit risk because those bonds are safe, but they took interest rate risk, and that's part of what a chief risk officer would look at.
Well, this is very good, Jim. Thank you very much for joining us today and for explaining this at very short notice.
And to the idiots here.
The idiots here.
Well,
yeah.
do you want to make a prediction? We can. Do you want to?
So we're going to hear the same thing about Signature Bank and then Republic Bank. And keep in mind that Signature Bank was lending based on cryptocurrencies, I mean, extremely high risk. And Republic Bank also had a lot of real estate and other issues with the same type of customer base. I just think that things will calm down when people suddenly start looking at the numbers and see that these banks are just a small fraction of the overall commercial banking assets in the country. And so, hopefully, and they'll see that this whole thing was driven by, like I said, a very small group of very wealthy, influential people.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I don't think we talked enough about that, but how much of are you saying that this is laughable, that it's a systemic risk, that it's basically the Democratic Party looking after its donors and its influential people?
I do. I absolutely believe that, because these are very niche banks. They're not into widespread. They're not lending to Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and all those. This is a very compartmentalized boutique bank, Silicon Valley Bank. Yes, it will probably, if they kind of fail, it'll affect suppliers and some element of high-end housing in California. Same thing with Republic Bank in New York. But, you know, I want to make one other point here before I leave, is that you notice that no other bank stepped in to acquire Silicon Valley Bank. And the reason is because of what happened in 2008 with Washington Mutual and the other banks that imploded. The government, they ended up getting sued constantly by the regulators after they did the government a favor and acquired these other banks. So it would have been very easy for a JP Morgan or Citicorp or anyone to come in and buy Silicon Valley Bank and just overnight make it go away. But over the weekend, none of those offers came forth because of what happened in 2008 and how the government.
No, look, I mean, in America they got sued. In Britain, was it the Royal Bank of Scotland and Santander? Maybe you know this better. They faced ABN AMRO. Yeah. They faced criminal charges for recklessly buying a bankrupt bank, and it's like, we were trying to help you out.
Yeah.
We were trying to save the economy. You know, we should be getting medals for this, not criminal charges, because they bought a turkey. They knew it was a turkey. They just didn't realize how big of a turkey it was.
Yeah, and no one wanted to charge up that hill this time.
Exactly, and we know that the government is politicizing the Justice Department now more than ever, in 8 months' time, do you think Elizabeth Warren and AOC and Bernie, who they're all on these committees now, do you think if the House flips or the Senate, that a Senate committee won't be having investigations and drag these bankers and have them taking the fifth and all this, and then bogus charges which will be settled for billions of dollars that they can funnel to their advocate groups?
I really think the government here, this administration, is just going to pound their chest on how they saved the banking system and with what they did. I don't think there'll be any hearings that'll be of any consequence because this is their donor base. Okay, Republic Bank as well as Silicon Valley Bank, and the venture capital people with it. So and even the vineyards, the folks with the vineyards and wineries. So
the vineyards,
not the humanity, the vineyards.
There was an article today in the Journal. This fellow, he was on a 650-acre vineyard, and he was complaining how tough it is. I mean, it sounded like the landlords these days.
650 acres is that up in Sonoma? And I mean, that's
a lot of money.
Billions and billions of dollars. I mean,
gazillions of dollars.
And there's always there's always people to buy vineyards. It's not as if it's not they're a trophy. They don't have to make money. People will. It's like newspapers or big hotels. One rich billionaire will sell it to another rich billionaire.
Yeah, well, that was a prediction I wanted to ask. You think that because while you can intellectualize a lot about this, a lot of runs on banks aren't based on rationality, correct? They're based on headlines that scare people. So, what's your prediction in terms of runs on general banks?
I think, like you said, most people, the majority of America, 98% have accounts under 250,000. I think there'll be a big shrug of the shoulder. It will cost some money to go over to the bigger banks. Once again, we're going to see a consolidation into JP Morgan, Citicorp, Wells. They'll benefit, that's kind of how I see this evolving. And then they'll have the hearings, of course, and they'll try to do what I mentioned earlier about disclosure and tying arrangements and things like that. But I'm really looking forward. An honest discussion has to happen with Mr. Powell at the Federal Reserve, because he needs, after 8 increases, you could see the damage.
Oh yeah, actually, funny. We keep saying goodbye to you, but actually more questions keep rising up. Do you think interest rates will have to come back now, or will? I mean,
he needs to make a statement that we're done with the rapid increases. We're going to see how inflation and how things pan out over a 6-month period, and then we'll revisit this. They need to take a breath.
Yeah, as I say, we'll see. We'll watch this space. Thank you so much for your time today, Jim. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good seeing you guys.
Yeah, you too. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Yep. So, I mean, the Democrats are the party of Wall Street, not the party of Main Street, and they're the party of Silicon Valley, not the Central Valley. See what I did there?
Very good, Philip. That's really very, very good. Honestly, that's wonderful. You were out of the jaws of something. Yeah.
I produced a cliche and
you
twisted
did.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So
it is St. Patrick's Day week, as you probably know, and we thought, you know what, we'll do a recipe for this week. And I decided we would do shepherd's pie, which is very, very popular in Ireland, by the way. You know, a lot of times Americans think that there's this, what do they call this thing that they do here, Philip?
Boiled beef and boiled beef and cabbage.
No, they don't. That's what we actually have in Ireland. What we actually have in Ireland is a thing called boiled ham. Wow. Boiled ham and cabbage.
Brisket, no.
But they do this thing here.
What do Americans eat for St. Patrick's Day?
What's that thing called?
I have no idea.
No,
something like cabbage.
No. There's some kind of a thing that they have here. But anyway, it's not at all Irish. But anyway, St. Patrick's.
I'm going to Google this now.
Shepherd's pie is very typical. It's very typical in Ireland. It's a very typical meal in Ireland. Now, the thing that I said there was a kind of that I'd kind of messed with the recipe. You're supposed to be making shepherd's pie, obviously, with lamb, but I don't like lamb. I've now acknowledged. Yes, I don't like lamb. I don't like the taste of lamb. So make
it's
it
like
with
socialism.
beef.
You just haven't tried the best lamb.
That's I've had very good lamb, I think, in the past. But yeah, no. So don't go there. So basically, you'll see here quite a lot of ingredients to make this meal happen. And obviously the recipe is going to be up on the website, unreportedstoriesociety.com. Go to there and you'll find all our recipes there, by the way. You need lots of things for this. So potatoes. Start with your potatoes. You quarter them, peel them and quarter them. I never peel potatoes, but I did on this occasion and it was worth it. Peel them and quarter them and, throw in about a teaspoon or tablespoon of salt in with them and bring them to a boil. They'll take about 15 to 20 minutes to cook. Okay, when your potatoes are done, when your potatoes have come to a boil, I'm going to do it through this way. I'm just going to tell you how we made the recipe and then you can look up all the ingredients, as I said, that on the website. But
what's the website?
Unreported Stories. Society.com, and you'll go to the podcast, and then under the podcast are all the recipes. So drain those potatoes and mash them, and we added to them cream and a lot of cheddar cheese that had been left over from the weekend. We had relatives staying and they left us lots of food in the fridge. So I had all this cheddar cheese that had been already shredded. So throw that in there and actually yum. We did really enjoy that. Then what you want to do is melt about 2 tablespoons of butter in a large oven-safe skillet. You can see the skillet that I use there. And add onion, chopped up onion, carrot, garlic, thyme, rosemary, and cook, stirring often with a wooden spoon until the onions are translucent and the carrots are just tender. That takes about 10 minutes. I'm just going to stop for a second and just say this is a great recipe. Honestly, we haven't had shepherd's. I can't believe I haven't made shepherd's pie on this podcast before. This is a really nice recipe. This was really, really yummy. Anyway, add the beef. I mean, funny, when I chose to do this recipe, I thought, it's very simple. It's incredibly simple, but it's just a little involved. It takes a little bit of time.
It's not.
It's not instant.
No.
So break up the meat with a spoon, and again, have not all that frying off until everything is no longer pink.
It may be comfort food, but it's not comfortable making it.
Then season your meat then with pepper and salt and add the tomato paste. Quite a bit of tomato paste you can see there being added. And cook that until it's all well combined, another 2 or 3 minutes. Then sprinkle some flour, I think it was about a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons of flour. Then cook that for a minute. Then add the beef stock, cook that. You see, there's a lot of stopping, starting. And keep cooking that until the liquid's basically all thickened up a bit. Then, very secret, very important ingredient, Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire sauce from Worcestershire. Mm-hmm. And don't say that very quickly after consuming a lot of drink on St. Patrick's Day.
Is it Worcester sauce or Worcestershire? Isn't it?
I would say Worcestershire sauce. Anyway, again, don't be asking me to oversay that. Really full of fabulous flavour. Gorgeous. Then, because you haven't, and Phelan was questioning me about this, because you haven't taken the thyme leaves off the thyme, which is really difficult, or with the rosemary, all you have to do is then at this point just remove the thyme, remove the rosemary. You'll pick them out really easily, and then stir in basically a cup of chopped up parsley.
Which is a lot of
Which
parsley.
seemed like a lot, but you know what? Unbelievable.
Didn't do any harm. Did a lot of good.
Then what you want to do is you're going to get your potato mixture and you're going to just pat that down on top. You're going to dollop it down on top of your meat and then spread it out using the forks of love, as our friend said. Basically, spread that out all over the top. And what is great was we were bringing that over to a friend's house, and so actually at that point you can stop. You could take a pause now with the making of that, and just let it sit there for a while. And then when you're ready to have, you're ready to eat your dinner, put that into a preheated oven of about 350 for about 30 minutes, and you'll know it's done when you see it bubbling up at the sides, and when the top has taken on a nice little kind of a nice colouring of brown. And if it hasn't, then you want to put it under the broiler,
or as we say in the rest of the world, the grill.
Yeah, what we call a grill in Ireland, and it's a very, very nice recipe. I highly recommend it. It's really, it's really, really nice. It was lovely. And it was very well appreciated. It was consumed in one sitting.
That's a long show we had today.
Yes.
I can confirm that food is delicious. Look at those pictures.
Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
St. Patrick's Day.
Enjoy. And we'll see you next week.
As long as you're from Ireland.
There's a welcome on the mat.
Boom. Bye.
Bye-bye.